The Acolyte is so frustrating because the concept appeals to me a lot. The ideas and the themes are intriguing, but almost every single episode has been mired by awful pacing issues, which make the show feel hollow. And episode 6 is no different. There is such a lack of depth that it feels almost impossible to connect with these characters. The absolutely diabolical 30-minute runtimes is giving the show no room to breathe. It's giving these characters no chance to just exist in this world. Every scene has to be a pivotal plot driver with hard-hitting philosophical dialogue, and it's so quick to take us from A to Z, and it's skipping everything in between. Characters don't take time to react to events, speak about how they feel or what they think. Character interactions feel contrived and unnatural, only serving to move the plot forward and nothing else. And for $180 million, it's mind-blowing how Lucasfilm and Disney can find this acceptable. Especially when you're running alongside rival shows like House of the Dragon, The Boys and Fallout, all three of which have lesser or if not the same budgets and almost double the amount of runtime. I don't get how this keeps happening with Star Wars and Disney shows. And so while those shows are getting 8 hours of incredible high-depth TV content, Star Wars fans are getting away with a meager 4 at best, nearly half the amount, and it's just beyond frustrating at this point, to be honest. Anyway, there will be spoilers ahead, so you have been warned. Episode 6 opens up with Osha in a mysterious cave. She finds her wounds healed, there is food being cooked, and she seems to be looked after. She then takes a couple minutes to look around and compose herself, but in hindsight, this scene just drags on for way too long. It is absolutely fine to have a longer scene like this to really establish the situation, if your episode isn't 30 minutes long. 10% of this episode has Osha looking around a cave aimlessly. Think about that. And this works if your episode is 60 or 70 minutes long, not when it is 30. And look, I'm not going to blame the director or the writers for wanting to include something like this, because it is things like this that give stories depth, establishing shots, slower moments with characters. But I'll say it for the third time just to drive home the point. You can't do this with a cartoon's runtime. There is a reason why cartoons and anime can't get away with this, and they instead use things like internal dialogue to provide exposition to things as they're happening, or even filler episodes which just serve to build up the world and to give characters more depth. Anime and cartoons understand what they need to do to maximize their short runtimes, whereas a show like this just doesn't. However, it is a bit of a double-edged sword because you end up getting what we have in this episode. A story that's focusing on slow, built-up mystery and intrigue without any of the time to actually do that properly. And so you can't slow the episode down to give them depth, but you also have to move things quickly because there's a lot of moving pieces. It's almost like they didn't really think this show out in regard to its scale and its scope. Anyway, we then jump back to Kofar, and we have another little pacing problem here because Sol and May continue from exactly where they left off in episode 5, yet elsewhere Osha has been taken to an entirely new planet in that same time frame, and there's a little bit of a time desynchronization issue here. But either way, Sol tries to send out a distress signal, but for some reason there is interference, and so May, pretending to be the expert engineer Osha, steps in to try and fix things, giving Sol a little downtime just to reflect on what the hell just happened. And this was an absolutely beautiful scene, and it just reinforces to me that Lee Jung-jae is absolutely the standout of this show. His acting is absolutely masterful. We're really starting to see the guilt and the trauma take a toll on him. Everything is beginning to overwhelm him and his emotions boil up. He is angry, he is crying, and he's smashing the table in frustration and sadness, but he takes the time to just recompose himself, realizing that he's a Jedi Knight and he's giving in to these dark emotions. And it was a beautiful little scene with a Jedi Master realizing that he's human, and it's scenes like this which give depth. It's not pivotal to the plot, but it's pivotal to him emotionally and us, the viewer, to connect with him. And I feel like he's the only character who's been having these moments in the entire show, really, and they're so far and few between. And for me, 6 episodes in, he is really carrying this show on his back. Anyway, we then jump back to the mysterious planet, which I think is clearly Boldemnik from the Plagueis novel, and Osha is stalking Kymir and follows him to a pool of water in which he bathes while she secretly watches. She then takes his lightsaber, which is with his clothes, but it's pretty evident that Kymir is doing this on purpose. He puts himself in a vulnerable position, naked without his weapon, to bring down her guard, showing the scars all over his body. But this is what I mean by a lack of depth. Kymir has been shown to be a rather humorous character. He regularly changes his personality from serious to whimsical at a moment's notice. It's what made his interactions in the last episode so entertaining to watch. And yet there's no comment about the fact that he's naked in front of this girl he's really just met. Without his weapon, there's no moment where Osha takes a look at this Sith weapon and really analyzes it because she's never seen something like this before. Instead, he just gets in the pool, gets out 5 seconds later, and instantly they start talking philosophically about the bigger plot. Like I said, going from A to Z without anything in between. And aside from maybe 1 or 2 moments with this episode, and generally the whole show, it is a constant problem. Because it makes the pacing from scene to scene feel so contrived and forced and unnatural most of the time. Everybody just seems to speak to each other in riddles like they're poets or something. This is why I liked episode 1 and 2, because there were moments of depth to characters. For example, Jeki walking on Yord, ironing his Jedi robe and just saying, "Put your clothes back on." It's little things like that that give you depth and give you a connection to characters, make you like them or dislike them. And it's where an extra 20, 15, hell even 10 minutes adds so much to a show, despite not being this huge, pivotal, plot-defining moment. And another perfect example of this is Vernestra in the whole episode. Now, there was one little moment with her that I really liked where another Jedi jokes to her about how she gets travel sick in hyperspace, but she gets told that Sol sent a distress signal saying that everybody was killed, and almost instantly she's like, right, I need to go to Kofar and investigate. No reaction, no real questioning as to what happens. She then ends up on Kofar, she finds all of these dead bodies, senses the chaos and the destruction, but it's so surface level, there's no depth to this scene. She just walks in, looks around, makes some comments to another Jedi, and has no real reaction aside from, something bad seems to be going on here. Like, yeah, Vernestra, you don't say. Why don't you spell it out for us a little bit more? And I'm just thinking to myself, take a step back and really look at this scene. There are a number of dead Jedi, all slain via lightsaber, and no one has any instinctual reaction. Couldn't there have been a little scene where Vernestra kneels down and she closes Jeki's eyes, a child killed in battle, which were wide open as she lay there dead? Couldn't we have had a slightly longer scene where Vernestra picks up one of the dead Jedi's lightsabers and closes her eyes and meditates for a moment, which then prompts that Force echo for her to follow and discover the truth of what happened? This is what I mean by depth. This is what I mean by the B's and the C's and the D's and everything in between, the meat on the bones. But instead we go from A, the distress signal, to Z, the force echo, just like that, with a few minutes of screen time. And it's the exact same thing with Chimere and Osha. Yes, they have some nice dialogue with each other, again plot-driven, almost philosophical and poetic, pushing the narrative forward, but it's hollow everywhere else. We haven't spent any time with Osha to process the fact that this man killed all of these Jedi brutally, including a character who she was building a friendship with and her childhood friend Yord. She instead goes from A, waking up, to Z, sitting in Chimere's cave listening to him and trying on his armor? There was such little character development here. There was no gradual storytelling flow that got us from the initial moment she woke up to the moment in that cave. Characters letting their guard down and slowly changing across the course of a show take time to get to that point. You can't just do it forcefully through hard-hitting, plot-moving dialogue all the time. For example, have a couple-minute scene where she is just examining the lightsaber and meditating on the fact that she is holding this weapon that killed her friends. Have a small scene where she's looking in a mirror and she starts to see her sister and not herself because she's slowly being corrupted by the idea that maybe Chimere isn't as bad as he makes out. Have a small scene where Chimere is offering her the soup and he makes a joke about how it's not poisoned because it hasn't killed him yet, building that bond between the two characters gradually. But no, we're gonna go from waking up and thinking you're evil, you're an SOB, you just killed all of my friends and family, to, you know what, I'm gonna try on your helmet because it's pretty damn cool, right? You seem like a chill dude. After about 10 minutes of screen time together and maybe 2 dialogue exchanges. And so much of what is going on just feels contrived, it feels hollow, and it feels poorly paced. And I don't even think you need to be an expert in storytelling or plotting to realise there's a problem here. It's all well and good having dichotomies between characters. It's all well and good having archetypes and themes. You can have the best concept for a story imaginable, but if those characters have no depth and there's no world building around them, it really isn't going to matter how good those ideas may have been. Anyway, we then have more scenes between May and Sol, and there is a really nice scene here where Sol hugs May and accepts that during the fight he gives in to his emotions and that he was sorry and that it wasn't very Jedi-like. And I don't know whether they're trying to build up again that dichotomy that I spoke about a moment ago, in which the bad protagonist is becoming a little bit softer due to the supposedly good deuteragonist with a very dark secret, opposed to the good protagonist who is being conflicted and twisted by the supposedly dark and evil antagonist who is very open about exposing that secret. And while that dichotomy does sound great on paper, if there's no depth to any of the interactions or the characters themselves, it's not going to mean anything. And what also isn't helping is that I'm finding the performance of the two protagonists, May and Osha, to be very flat and very stale, and I'm really struggling to connect and really find myself engrossed in a story that is central to these two characters because of that. But eventually Sol realizes that this isn't Osha and he stuns her when her back is turned, and I'm not entirely sure how he came to this realization. I may have missed something, I will admit. Maybe it was something to do with the little mouse creature that was on the ship, but I do think it was a little bit silly that he couldn't realize it wasn't Osha anyway through the Force. But alas, maybe they could chalk it up to him being blinded by his emotions. And then he confines May and his demeanor switches and he tells her that she's going to listen. I don't know if this was a subtle emotional change because this was something that he has been bottling up, or if this was a darker shift to the character, but I liked this moment either way. The episode then comes to a close with Osha and Chimere. He speaks about cortosis and its ability to short out lightsabers, and they also speak about the fact that he was a Jedi who was abandoned like her. And they're building up this connection between the 2, which is a bit late in my opinion, in which Osha has the chance to kill him, and he basically goads her into doing it, but instead she puts the lightsaber up to his neck and chooses not to. I don't really know whether they're trying to veer this into a romantic connection. I mean, a Sith and a Jedi isn't a common trope. It has happened before, but definitely not in live action. But it's really hard to know if this is actually Kymia's character. Somebody that is thoughtful, can be kind and caring, but also consumed by the dark side, which admittedly is a trope I love. I mean, I loved it in the EU when it was done, but it's widely considered to be a contradiction in canon that shouldn't really work. That being a character consumed by the dark side that's actually a pretty chill dude. But it's because of that I think that it's likely a front. He also reveals that he's got this big whip scar on his back, saying it was given to him by his master after he was abandoned, and conveniently Vernestra has a whip-like lightsaber that she uses to kill a beetle in this episode. Now they could be trying to throw us off, making us think that Vernestra has something to do with Kymia, but either way the episode ends with May after she decides to just put his Cortosis helmet on, and that is that. So, yeah, I was really frustrated with this episode because after such a big destructive episode last week, this was the time to slow down, take a breath, really get into the minds of our characters and let the show just breathe and relax. Let this episode have a runtime of 60 minutes. Let Osha and May and Kymia and Vernestra just exist in this world for a moment. Let them react to things that have happened. Let them feel the universe they're in. Let them digest everything. But no. It felt like almost every single scene needed some heavy plot-driving moments because of the atrocious runtimes more suited to cartoons, and it's just becoming really difficult to connect with this show. Anyway, that is enough from me. If you enjoyed the review, don't forget to hit the like button, it helps me out a great deal. And if you want to see my review for the penultimate episode of The Acolyte next week, perhaps consider subscribing so you're notified when the video goes live. And if you want some more awesome Star Wars content that's almost as long as an episode of The Acolyte, you should check this video out. It's an in-depth look as to why Revan's redemption in Knights of the Old Republic was a dark, dark lie. I'll see you there.